You don't have to stay, you know. I know. So, why are you still standing there? Because, I don't know. Because you're crying and you're trying to pretend you're not, and I've never been good at walking away from things that aren't finished. I'm not a project, Mia. No, you're not. Then what am I? I'm still working that out. That conversation happened on a Tuesday, 3 months after the supply room, 2 weeks after I finally stopped lying to myself, 1 hour before everything changed in a way I hadn't seen coming. The thing is, I thought I had Gabby figured out from the beginning. I thought I had her in a box, labeled, filed away, understood. I was so sure. I was so completely, entirely wrong. And the part that undoes me, the part I keep turning over and over in the dark, is that she knew. She knew before I did. She knew the whole time. Let me go back to the beginning. Because this story doesn't start with a supply room. It starts 6 months before that. It starts with a new hire orientation and a conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and ambition, and a woman with an earring shaped like a small crescent moon who sat 2 seats away from me and asked the HR coordinator a question so direct that half the room flinched. I didn't flinch. I took notes. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. My name is Mia Calloway, and I am, by nature and by training, a person who keeps things organized. I have a system for my inbox. I have a system for my mornings. I have a system for how I load the dishwasher, how I label my leftovers, how I structure my weekends so that Monday arrives and I am ready. Genuinely ready, not caffeinated and pretending, for whatever the week asks of me. I am 31 years old. I work in project coordination at Ellison & Park, a mid-sized marketing firm in Chicago that specializes in brand strategy for healthcare companies. It is not glamorous work. It is methodical, precise, deadline-sensitive work, and I am very good at it, which is exactly why I got the promotion to senior coordinator 8 months before Gabby walked into that orientation room. I had a life. A real one. A clean apartment in Lincoln Park, with a plant wall I'd spent 3 weekends cultivating, and a collection of ceramic mugs that I never let anyone use unless I trusted them completely. I had a routine. Gym on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Farmer's market on Saturday. Call with my mom on Sunday evenings. Everything in its place, every place accounted for. I also had exactly one close friend at work, Priya, who sat 2 desks over from me, who made the same exasperated face I made every time the CFO sent a 10-paragraph email that could have been a sentence, and who had, over the course of 2 years, become one of those people I couldn't imagine the workday without. I did not need anyone new. I want to say that clearly, because it's important to understand the shape of my life before Gabby entered it. I was not lonely. I was not searching. I was not one of those people who walks around with a vacancy sign they don't know they're wearing. I was complete. Or I thought I was. Gabby Reyes joined Ellison & Park in September as a creative strategist, which meant her desk was on the floor below mine. Her world was campaigns and concepts, and the kind of instinctive sensory thinking I had never really understood, and our professional lives had approximately 0 reason to intersect. I noticed her at orientation, because she asked the kind of question you only ask if you already know the answer, and you want to see how the person in front of you handles it. The HR coordinator, a perfectly nice woman named Janet, had just finished explaining the company's approach to collaborative cross-departmental synergy, and Gabby raised her hand and said very calmly, "Is there a documented process for that? Or is it mostly culture-dependent?" Janet blinked. The room shifted. I wrote down, "Creative strategist, 2nd row, crescent moon earring, asks questions with teeth." Not because I thought it would matter. Just because I notice things. It's what I do. We didn't speak that day. We nodded at the coffee station. That was it. The first time we actually talked was 3 weeks later, in the elevator, when I was carrying an overfull box of archived files and she was holding a cardboard cup of tea and reading something on her phone. And the elevator jerked. Not dangerously, just enough. and one of my folders slid off the top of the box and landed at her feet. She didn't look up from her phone immediately. She bent down, picked up the folder, tucked it back on top of my stack, and said without looking at me, "You're carrying more than you need to." I didn't know what to say to that. She looked up then, smiled, not the polished, performing smile some people use at work, but something smaller and more specific, like the smile was meant only for that moment, and not for anyone passing by. "The files," she said. "The box looks overloaded." "Oh." I adjusted my grip. "I'm aware." "You could have made 2 trips." "I could have," I agreed. "But I didn't." The elevator reached my floor. The doors opened. I stepped out. She stayed on. She was going down, I realized, not up. She'd been coming from somewhere above and riding all the way back down. I didn't think about why. I should have thought about why. Priya, when I mentioned this interaction in passing the following afternoon, made the face she makes when she thinks something is interesting, but is waiting to see if I'm going to catch up. "Crescent moon earring?" she said. "Yeah." "I've seen her in the kitchen. She makes her own tea. She carries loose leaves in a tin." I blinked. "How do you know this?" Priya shrugged. "I notice things." "I notice things," I said. "Sure," she said, in a tone that suggested she was being very generous. I let it go. There was nothing to notice. She was a coworker, a new one who had carried loose-leaf tea in a tin and picked up my folder without making it a thing. That was fine. That was just a person being decent. The next time we talked was in the kitchen, not planned, not engineered, just a Tuesday morning in October when I came in early because I had a 9 o'clock call that I needed to review notes for. And she was already there, standing at the counter with her little tin of tea, and the early morning light was coming through the east-facing window in a way that turned everything slightly gold. She was reading something, not her phone, an actual printed article, folded in quarters the way people used to fold newspapers. Her earrings that day were small gold hoops. She was wearing a dark green sweater that looked like it had been washed enough times to become exactly the right amount of soft. She didn't notice me come in. I noticed her noticing the article. I made my coffee. I told myself not to say anything. She was busy. I was busy. We were colleagues. We did not need to have a conversation. "Is that a physical printout?" I asked. She looked up. There was a half-second where her eyes adjusted. Not startled, just recalibrating. Like someone surfacing from deep water smoothly, not gasping. "It is," she said. "Of what?" "A case study. Brand architecture for a healthcare nonprofit." She turned it toward me briefly. "Our next pitch is for something similar. I like to read the physical version when I'm thinking. Screens make me skim." I nodded. That made a specific kind of sense I hadn't expected. "Does it work?" I asked. "The reading?" She thought about it genuinely, which I noticed because most people don't actually think before answering small questions. Mostly. Sometimes I just end up folding it into smaller and smaller squares. And what does that mean? Usually that the case study is bad, and I'm working out my feelings about it manually. I laughed. Not a polite laugh. An actual one. The kind that comes before you can decide whether it's appropriate. She smiled at it, at the laugh, in a way that I didn't quite have a word for yet. I picked up my coffee. I said, "Good luck with the pitch," and went back upstairs to my desk. I did not think about her smile. I did not think about the way she'd said, working out my feelings about it manually, like it was a completely normal and precise description of a thing people do. I did not think about any of it. I sat down at my desk and reviewed my call notes, and everything was exactly as it always was. Priya walked in 20 minutes later, set a muffin on my desk without comment, and said, "You look like you were just slightly surprised by something." "I'm fine," I said. "Okay," she said. She took a bite of her own muffin and did not pursue it. That was October. Here is what I knew about Gabby Reyes by mid-November. She got to work early, but not by design. She was the kind of early that happens because she woke up and couldn't stay in bed, not because she'd planned it. She always had tea. She always had something to read. She had a small succulent on her desk that she'd named something I didn't find out until later, and she talked to it in the way some people talk to plants. Briefly, affectionately, without embarrassment. She was good at her job in a way that you could feel even from a floor above, because the campaigns that came out of her team had a quality to them that the rest of the floor talked about. Not flashy, just true. Somehow they always managed to feel like they'd been made specifically for the person looking at them, and not for the general concept of a person. I knew that she took her lunch outside when the weather allowed, even when allowed was a generous interpretation of 52 degrees and overcast. I knew she didn't eat at her desk. I knew she laughed at the kind of dry, understated things that most people let pass, and that when she laughed, she tilted her head back slightly, not dramatically, just enough. I also knew that she had a habit of appearing in places where I happened to be, or I happened to appear in places where she was. It was genuinely difficult to tell which. By November, we had exchanged approximately 11 conversations. I know this because I am the kind of person who notices patterns without intending to, and the pattern had become, quietly, undeniable. Kitchen encounters at odd hours, a cross-departmental meeting where she'd been looped in as a creative consultant, and I'd been there for logistics. A Friday afternoon where I'd been returning borrowed chairs to the 8th floor conference room and she'd been setting up for a presentation, and we'd spent 45 minutes in that conference room talking about nothing. About a documentary she'd watched. About a neighborhood I'd lived in before Lincoln Park. About the specific phenomenon of grocery stores at midnight. 45 minutes. I had a thing I was supposed to finish. I did not finish it until 9:30 that night. And I didn't mind. That was the first flag I didn't wave at myself. The second one came in late November, at the company's pre-Thanksgiving gathering. A low-key thing, catered snacks, everyone semi-present. The kind of event you show up to for 15 minutes and stay for 40, because the cheese selection is unexpectedly good. Priya had gone home early. I was standing near the window with a small plate of things I didn't particularly want to eat, looking out at Michigan Avenue and thinking about the Parker account deliverable I hadn't finished, when Gabby appeared beside me. Not behind me. Beside. Like she'd calculated the angle. She was holding a glass of sparkling water with a wedge of lime balanced on the rim. "You look," she said, looking out the window too. Like someone who was attending a party they didn't completely agree to. "I agreed to it," I said. "Technically, maybe. I like the cheese." "Everyone likes the cheese. That's not why you stayed." I turned to look at her. She was still looking at the window. At the city. At the street below. At the cold November air pressing itself against the glass. "Why do you think I stayed?" I asked. She considered this the same way she considered everything. Not quickly, but not laboriously. Genuinely. "I think," she said, "you stayed because leaving felt more effortful than staying. And I think that's probably true of several things for you." I didn't say anything. She finally turned to look at me. Did I get that wrong? The honest answer was no. The answer I gave was, "I don't know you well enough for you to say things like that." She smiled. "Fair." We stood at that window for another 20 minutes, talking about things that weren't what she'd said. But she'd said it, and it stayed, and I carried it home in my coat pocket without meaning to, and found it again at midnight when I was trying to fall asleep. I told myself it was just perceptive. People are perceptive sometimes. It didn't mean anything. It didn't mean anything. December arrived, and with it a wave of year-end deliverables that buried me for 3 weeks. I barely saw Gabby. I thought about that sentence. Thought about the fact that I'd used the word barely, and that I'd noticed the scarcity. And I recategorized it immediately. She was just a colleague I'd been running into. The frequency had dropped because we were both busy. This was normal. This was how work friendships operated. Work friendship. That was the box I put it in. I filed it under Gabby, G, colleague, creative floor, occasionally interesting to talk to, not a priority. I told myself that was accurate. I was lying to myself in the particular way you lie to yourself when you're doing it deliberately, and have decided that the lie is worth maintaining. The supply room happened in January. I want to describe it correctly, because the way people imagine supply rooms, cramped, fluorescent lit, somehow comedic, is not quite what happened. Our supply room on the 4th floor was actually generous, as supply rooms go. Wide shelving, motion sensor lights, a side counter that the admin team used to prep presentation materials. It smelled like paper and ink and faintly, weirdly, like cedar. Someone had hung one of those wooden air fresheners behind the copy paper shelf months ago, and nobody had removed it. I was in there on a Wednesday afternoon in January because I needed a specific size of binding cover for a proposal I was prepping, and the general supply cabinet on my floor had been cleaned out by someone who clearly didn't understand that the coral-colored covers were not the same as the burgundy ones. I found the right covers. I found them on the 3rd shelf, which required me to reach, which required me to move a box of rubber bands that had been placed directly in front of them, which required approximately 3 minutes of quiet, methodical work during which I was completely alone. And then the door opened and Gabby walked in. She stopped when she saw me. "Oh," she said. "Hi," I said. "I didn't know anyone was in here." "I'm in here. I can see that." She was carrying a list, an actual handwritten list on a yellow notepad, items checked off with a small check mark, not a tick, not an X, a specific careful little check. She held it up briefly, as if explaining herself. "Foam boards. We're doing a final presentation, and our boards are somehow not..." The door clicked. We both looked at it. Gabby walked over and tried the handle. It did not turn. She tried it again, more deliberately, the way you try something a second time when the first result is impossible. It remained not turning. "Well," she said. She turned back to look at me. And here is the thing. Here is the precise thing. She didn't look alarmed. She didn't look exasperated. She looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as gently, privately amused. Like this was inconvenient, and also somehow exactly what she might have expected from a Wednesday in January. She smiled, and she said, "Guess we wait together." There is a difference between a room that is small because of its dimensions and a room that becomes small because of what's in it. The 4th floor supply room was not a small room. It became one. I don't mean that in the way people mean it, in movies, where suddenly everything goes soft-focused and significant. I mean it practically, physically. There was a supply room, and we were in it, and we couldn't leave. And the quality of air between us changed in a way I was not prepared for and did not know what to do with. Gabby, because Gabby, was not distressed about this. She set her yellow notepad on the side counter, checked her phone, saw what I already knew, that we were stuck until someone either came to use the room or we reached somebody who could let us out, and then settled onto the counter itself, cross-legged, as if being trapped in a supply closet was a perfectly reasonable way to spend a Wednesday afternoon. "Did you text anyone?" I asked. "Priya," she said. "She's on a call. She said she'll come by when she's done in 20 minutes. "Okay." I stayed standing. There was no particular reason to stay standing, except that sitting felt like a decision I wasn't ready to make. "You can sit," Gabby said. "I'm fine." "You look like you're preparing to give a deposition." I sat on the counter. She didn't say anything for a moment. The motion sensor lights were on because we'd moved when we came in, but they would cycle off in a few minutes if we stayed still. and I found myself thinking about that. Thinking about what the room would be like in the dark. And then I thought about what I had just thought about and moved slightly, deliberately to keep the lights on. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Gabby said. "Okay," I said. "You don't have to answer." "I usually decide that for myself," I said, and something in my own voice surprised me. It was more direct than I usually am with people I don't know well. More like myself. She noticed. I could tell by the way she tilted her head. Not much. Just a fraction. "At the Thanksgiving thing," she said. "When I said that thing about leaving feeling like more effort than staying. I remember. You said I didn't know you well enough to say things like that." "I did." I wanted to ask if that was true, or if it was the thing people say when someone said something accurate and they don't want to confirm it. The light sensor was counting down. I stayed still. "Why does it matter?" I asked. "It doesn't, technically. I was just curious." "You're often curious. Is that a complaint?" "No." And it wasn't. It was a fact, and not an unwelcome one, and I wasn't sure what to do with the fact that I had an opinion about it at all. "It's accurate." She looked at me steadily. Gabby's version of steadiness was different from most people's. It wasn't the steadiness of someone who was being patient or waiting you out. It was the steadiness of someone who was genuinely, unhurriedly interested in what came next. "You were right," I said, "about what you said. It was accurate." She nodded once, like she'd suspected, but was glad to have it confirmed. Not triumphant, just receiving it cleanly. "Okay," she said. "Thank you for telling me. You didn't need to know that." "I know." "Then why did you ask?" She looked at the shelf behind me for a moment, a row of cardstock packages and a box of label makers, and then back at me. "Because," she said, "I'm interested in what's actually true about you, not just the polished version." She said it simply, without weight, like it was just a statement of navigational preference. Like she was telling me which route she preferred to take. The lights clicked off. We were in the dark. Not complete dark. There was a thin strip of light coming from under the door, but the overhead lights were off, and the room was dim, and I could see the outline of her but not her expression, and for some reason that was worse than the lights being on. I moved my arm. The lights came back. We were looking at each other. She didn't apologize for what she'd said. I didn't ask her to. 20 minutes later, Priya knocked on the door and let us out. It turned out the latch had a known issue that facilities had been ignoring for months, which Priya delivered with the brisk efficiency of someone who had been quietly cataloging building maintenance failures for some time. Gabby retrieved her foam boards. I retrieved my binding covers. We walked out of the room and back toward our respective floors, and at the elevator she pressed the button for the second floor, and I pressed the button for the fifth, and we stood side by side for a moment in the corridor. "Thanks for the company," she said. "I didn't really do anything," I said. "You moved your arm to keep the lights on." I looked at her. "I noticed," she said. Simple. Not making it more than it was. Except that it was more than it was, and we both knew it, and neither of us said so. The elevator opened. We got in. We rode in silence. She got off at 2. I rode up to 5. I sat at my desk, and I opened my laptop, and I looked at the Parker account file, and I did not do anything with it for approximately 12 minutes. Then I told myself, she's curious, and she's observant, and she's the kind of person who pays attention. And that is a characteristic, not an overture. I believed that. I almost believed that. The thing about believing your own rationalizations is that they work best in the first 48 hours. After that, they start to develop small structural failures that you notice at inconvenient times, at the gym, in the shower at 2 a.m., When you can't quite fall asleep, and you find yourself thinking about the exact quality of the light coming from under a supply room door. January stretched into February, and in February, 2 things happened. The first was that Gabby and I ended up on the same cross-departmental task force. The second was that I stopped pretending I didn't look for her in the kitchen in the mornings. The task force was for a rebrand initiative, a healthcare nonprofit called Holloway Partners that was trying to reposition its identity for a younger donor demographic. My job was logistics and timeline management. Gabby's job was creative concept development. We were supposed to work in parallel and check in bi-weekly, but what actually happened was that we started checking in more frequently because it was more efficient. That was the reason I gave Priya when she raised an eyebrow. "It's just efficient," I said. "Mm-hmm," she said. "She's easy to work with." "I believe you." "Why do you say it like that?" Priya put down her sandwich. "I say it like that because I believe you. Genuinely. I just also think that easy to work with is doing a lot of work in that sentence." I opened my email. Priya ate her sandwich. I did not pursue the conversation, because pursuing the conversation would have required me to be more honest with Priya than I was being with myself, and I wasn't ready for that particular sequence of events. What was actually happening, and I am able to say this now with the clarity that only comes from the other side, was that Gabby had become someone I thought about the way you think about a song you keep returning to without knowing why. Not obsessively, not dramatically, just with a consistent, quiet frequency that I couldn't track to a source. The way she took notes in meetings with an actual pen and actually heard what people said instead of planning her response. The way she pushed back on ideas, not combatively, but with a precision that made you reconsider the idea from a different angle. The way she remembered small things you'd mentioned once, in passing, and then referenced them weeks later with no ceremony, just a clean continuity. You mentioned you ran the Chicago Marathon once. Was that the year they changed the course through the Bronzeville route? Or I know you're particular about timelines, so I built in buffer here. Hope that reads right. I'd never met anyone who listened the way she listened, and I had never wanted anyone's attention as much as I found myself, quietly, without permission, wanting hers. That was what I wasn't saying out loud, even to myself, especially to myself. February had this terrible quality of warmth. Not real warmth, just those false spring days Chicago throws at you sometimes. 58 degrees on a Tuesday. Everyone confused and cautiously relieved, wearing light jackets and moving a little faster on the sidewalk. On one of those days, Gabby and I had a working lunch outside. Not a romantic thing, just 2 people with an actual deadline and 2 sandwiches from the deli on Erie Street, sitting on the steps of the building's side entrance because it was too nice to be inside. We went through the task force materials. We made decisions. It was productive. And then we finished the materials, and we were still sitting there, and neither of us got up. And she said, "Can I ask you something personal?" I said, "Depends on the question." "What made you good at this?" she said. "The coordination, the systems. Is it natural or did you work at it?" "Both," I said. I was always organized. I made it a skill because I was scared of what happened when things fell apart. I said that before I'd decided to say it. She didn't react like it was a revelation. She nodded like it confirmed something she'd already considered. "What happens," she said, "when things fall apart?" "They take longer to put back together than you think they will," I said. "And some of them don't go back the same way." "Personal experience?" "Some." She was quiet for a moment. The city moved around us. A delivery truck, a woman with a stroller, a group of people in scrubs from the hospital around the corner. "I think," Gabby said slowly, "that the things that don't go back the same way are usually the ones that needed to change." I looked at her. "I don't always mean that as a comfort," she added. "Sometimes it's just true. It doesn't feel like a comfort when you're in it," No, she agreed. It doesn't. She said that like she knew from somewhere specific. I didn't ask where. But I thought about it. On the walk back inside, our arms brushed. Barely. Just the texture of her sleeve against mine. The half-second of unexpected contact that happens between two people navigating a doorway. She didn't comment on it. I didn't comment on it. I thought about it for the rest of the afternoon. And then I got home, and I sat on my couch, and I had a direct internal conversation with myself. The kind you have when the rationalizations stop working, and you need to be honest at least in the privacy of your own head. Something was happening. I didn't know what to call it. I wasn't sure I was ready to call it anything. But something was happening. And it was happening specifically in the direction of Gabi Reyes. And the fact that I'd spent the last several months categorizing it as efficient, just observant, easy to work with, and professionally interesting was starting to feel less like clarity and more like a very organized system of avoidance. I had built a system. I was trapped inside it. And the worst part, the actual worst part, was that I didn't know if I was more afraid of what I felt or afraid that she might not feel it too. It turned out that both fears were wrong in their assumptions, but I didn't know that yet. March arrived cold and determined, the way March in Chicago always does, and the task force work intensified because the Holloway Partners pitch was 3 weeks out. Gabi and I were meeting almost daily now, which was completely defensible on the basis of the project timeline, and also served as a very convenient excuse for something that had nothing to do with the timeline at all. She started bringing me tea. Not as a gesture, not as a thing. Just, she'd be making her own, and she'd bring a second cup because she'd noticed months ago that I transitioned from coffee to tea in the afternoons, and she'd started making two. The first time she set it on the conference table next to my laptop without saying anything, I looked at it and then at her, and she was already looking at her own materials. "You didn't have to do that," I said. "I was already making mine," she said. "Still." She looked up. "Is it a problem?" "No," I said. "It's not." And it wasn't. And that was the problem. Because I didn't want it to be a gesture. I wanted it to be nothing. Just a colleague thing. Just tea. But I knew, sitting in that conference room with the afternoon coming in low through the east windows, and Gabi turning pages and the smell of cedar and paper still somehow finding me even 3 floors away from the supply room. I knew that it wasn't just tea. I just still wasn't ready to say what it was instead. Priya, for her part, had stopped commenting. Which was worse. Priya not commenting meant Priya had decided that commenting was no longer going to move things along, and had taken a position of watchful patience instead. She brought me coffee in the mornings without asking. She rerouted conversations away from work topics when I had the look she called my spreadsheet face, but that I knew, privately, was the face I made when I was thinking about something I wasn't talking about. She did not push. She waited. I thought, I will figure this out. I thought I have time. I thought, it's probably fine. It's probably just... And then the thing happened. The thing that I could not fold into a smaller and smaller square and file under professionally interesting. The thing that changed everything. It was a Thursday, 2 weeks before the pitch, and we were working late. Just the 2 of us in the main conference room, the rest of the floor empty, the city outside going dark and then going lit. The way Chicago transforms at 8 o'clock in winter, all black glass and amber windows. We'd been at it for hours. There were materials everywhere, her handwriting and my printed timelines side by side on the table, the specific organized chaos of something that was almost finished but not quite. She was reading something aloud, a section of the brand language she'd drafted. And I was listening, and I had a note to give, a practical structural note, and I opened my mouth to say it. And I stopped. Because she was reading, and her voice was low and even. And she'd tucked one knee up on the chair, the way she did when she settled in for something, and she was using her pen to trace the line she was reading, not consciously, just following the words with the tip of the pen like a compass following north. And I watched that, and I felt something in my chest that I had no category for. Not warmth, not affection, something else. Something with weight, something that had been building for 6 months in careful layers and chose that precise, ordinary moment. Her pen tracing words, her voice steady, the city going amber outside, to arrive fully. She looked up. She caught me looking. I didn't look away in time. She held that for a moment. Just a moment. Just long enough that the moment was acknowledged and not ignored. And then she looked back at her document. "Did you have a note?" she said. "Yeah," I said. "Okay," she said. "Tell me." And I gave the note. And we kept working. And we finished at 9:47 and packed up and said goodnight in the lobby and went to our respective trains, and I rode home in the dark with my bag in my lap and a specific kind of ringing in my chest that I could not silence and could not name and could not, any longer, pretend wasn't there. I got home. I sat on my couch. I did not try to rationalize. I just sat there, with the feeling, and let it exist. And then I thought, now what? That was the question. That was the entire, unresolvable question. Because it was one thing to admit to myself that something had shifted. It was another thing entirely to know what to do with it, especially when the thing that had shifted was the kind of thing I had, up until 6 months ago, not known I was capable of shifting toward. I was not someone who examined this kind of thing out loud. I was not someone who had a language for it, ready and available, in the middle of a Thursday night with the Chicago wind coming in under my front door. What I knew, her voice tracing words, her pen following the line, the weight in my chest that had arrived with her looking up and catching me. What I did not know, everything else. I called Priya the next morning before work. I said, "I think I might have a problem." She said, "I know." I said, "You're not going to make me say it. Are you?" She said, "I'm going to let you say it at whatever pace is right for you. And then I'm going to say I know again, because I have genuinely known since October." I said, "October. The morning kitchen conversation. The thing about the case study. You came back upstairs looking like someone had slightly rearranged the furniture in your brain." I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at my plant wall. "I don't know what to do with this," I said. "I know," she said, "but I think you need to let yourself have it before you decide what to do with it. Just let it be real for a minute. You're allowed to do that." I sat with that. "Okay," I said. "Good," she said. "Now get dressed. I'll bring the coffee." But before we continue, if you've made it this far, I want you to know something. You didn't just watch a story. You felt it, that specific kind of feeling, when you realize something's been growing in you before you had a name for it. That's what this channel is about. Real feelings, real moments. The ones that change us quietly, without announcing themselves. So if this is landing, hit the like button right now. It genuinely helps more than you know, and it tells me this is worth making more of. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now and hit the bell, so the next story finds you when it's ready. Now I want to know something from you, in the comments. Have you ever had a moment, a small, completely ordinary moment, where you realized someone had already gotten further inside your walls than you'd meant to let them? Tell me about it. I read every single one. And tell me where you're watching from. I'll put a heart on yours. Okay. Let's go back. Let's go back to Mia. The pitch went well. Holloway Partners greenlit the campaign. The creative team was going to build it out. My work on the project was functionally done, and the task force, the thing that had been giving Gabby and me a reason, a structured, blameless, professional reason to spend that much time together was over. I had not said anything. I had not done anything except admit it to myself and to Priya, and then proceed to make myself extremely busy with the Parker deliverable and 2 other projects that were not, objectively, emergencies, but that I treated as such for approximately 3 weeks. I was avoiding her. I knew I was doing it. I was doing it on purpose, with full awareness, because the alternative was to be in the same room with Gabby Reyes and know what I knew and not be able to put it away, and I was not ready for that. She noticed. Of course she noticed. She was Gabby. She noticed everything. The first week she didn't say anything. The second week she sent me a message. Just a message. No preamble. No interrogation. Hey, I feel like I haven't seen you in a while. Hope the Parker thing isn't eating you alive. I responded 3 hours later with something efficient and bloodless about the Parker thing being manageable and thanking her for asking. She responded, okay. Just that. 2 letters. And somehow those 2 letters communicated more than 2 paragraphs would have in her specific and precise way of communicating without oversaying. The third week, she appeared at my desk. I had not expected her to come to my floor. I was in the middle of something, a spreadsheet. I was mid-cell, and I looked up and she was standing there in a dark blue jacket with a cup of tea in her hand and an expression that I can only describe as patient and unsurprised and slightly firmly resolved. "Can I take 5 minutes?" she said. "I'm in the middle of, I know, 5 minutes." I saved the spreadsheet. I turned my chair. She sat down in the chair across from my desk, the one where my Priya usually parked herself, and she set her tea down on the edge, and she looked at me the way she'd looked at me in the supply room when the lights were still on. "I want to say something," she said, "and I want you to actually hear it and not immediately categorize it." "I don't categorize things," I said. Her eyebrow moved. "Fine," I said. "You've been avoiding me," she said. "I've been busy." "I know you've been busy. You're always busy. You've also been avoiding me." She said it without accusation, which somehow made it worse. "I'm not saying it to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because I noticed and because I'd rather name it than pretend it's not happening." I looked at my desk. "I also want to say," she continued, and her voice was even, still even, the voice she used when she was being entirely serious and entirely unperformative, "that I'm not here to make things weird. I like working with you. I like talking to you. And if something shifted and you need space, I can do that. I just..." She paused. "I don't like when things go unaddressed. It takes up more room that way." I looked up. She was looking at me. And what hit me, what arrived fully and without warning in that moment, was this. She was not here to push. She was not here to make me say something I wasn't ready to say. She was here because something had gone quiet between us, and she couldn't abide the silence when the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was just avoidance. And she was too honest not to come and name it. She wasn't afraid. She was looking at me the way she'd looked at every difficult thing I'd seen her look at, directly, without softening it, without needing it to be something else. And I thought, I've been so sure I'm the one who holds things together. I've been so sure I'm the stable one. The one who knows herself. The one who doesn't fall apart. "I'm scared," I said. It came out before I could sort it. She didn't move. "Of what?" she said. "Of the part where this..." I stopped, reorganized. "I've had a very clear idea of who I am for a long time. And this has... You have..." Another stop. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" I looked at her directly. Not know something. Something happened in her face. Not softening. Deepening. Something that was older and more specific than warmth. "I know," she said quietly. "You keep saying that. Because it's true." "You knew before I did," I said. She didn't confirm it and didn't deny it, just held it. When? I asked, because I needed to know. Not to be hurt by it, to understand the timeline, to understand how long she had known the thing I hadn't known about myself. She thought about it with her genuine considering face. November, she said. The window at the Thanksgiving thing. You said you didn't know me well enough for me to say things like that. But you also said I was right. She paused. Someone only pushes back like that about something that doesn't matter to them. I sat with that. And I've been scared too, she added. Quietly, without drama. I want to say that, because I think you might assume I'm not. I looked at her. Why? I said. Because, she said, I've done this before. The realizing, the naming, the figuring it out. And it's still, she exhaled. It still costs something every time, even when you know what it is. I thought about the case study she'd been reading the morning in the kitchen. The way she'd said she folded things into smaller and smaller squares when they weren't working, and she was working out her feelings manually. You've been folding this, I said. She blinked. The kitchen, I said. You said you fold things when you're working out your feelings. You've been doing that. Yes, she said. After a moment, I felt something crack open, not painfully, but the way a window cracks open, just enough to let the actual air in. I said, I don't know where this goes. She said, nobody does. That's not a Mia thing. That's everyone. That's not comforting. I know, but it's true. A pause. You don't have to know where it goes to know what it is. I looked at her. I thought about every system I'd ever built, every labeled box, every 2-trip decision I'd refused to make because I could carry it all at once. Every rational, organized, efficient decision I had made about who I was and what I needed and what was real. I thought about how wrong I had been about what I was carrying. I thought about a supply room and light under a door, and my arm moving. I don't want to not know you, I said. She was quiet. Whatever this is, I said. Whatever it ends up being. I don't want to have built more walls than I already have and end up on the other side of them from you. Her expression did something I didn't have a word for. Not relief, not joy. Something more interior than either. Something that looked like recognition. Like a door being unlocked that she'd been sitting next to for a long time. Okay, she said. Okay, I said. We sat there, in the particular non-silence of an open office floor where everything around us was continuing to happen. Keyboards, and a distant phone, and someone's rolling chair. And we did not say more than that. We didn't need to. Here is what I thought I knew about Gabby Reyes. That she was confident. That she was certain. That she moved through the world with a clarity about herself that I found quietly staggering, because I had spent 31 years believing that certainty about yourself was something you either had or you didn't. And she had it visibly in every room, and I had been covertly envying it since October. I thought she was the together one, the clear-eyed one. The one who had figured herself out a long time ago and was operating accordingly, steady and assured, while I was the one catching up. I thought I was the one who needed to be met. I was wrong. I started to understand this in March, and I understood it fully in April, in a way that rearranged everything I thought I knew about both of us. In March, the things between us began shifting. Slowly at first. In the specific slow way of things that have been patient for months and are now simply releasing pressure. We had lunch twice. We had 3 after-work conversations that started as work-related and became something else. She texted me about things that weren't work, a documentary she thought I'd argue with, a news piece about urban planning that she said made her think of something I'd mentioned once about my old neighborhood. I texted back, I argued with the documentary. I read the article. I told her the thing about my old neighborhood she'd remembered. I noticed that she remembered everything. I noticed that she asked follow-up questions. I noticed that being the subject of her attention was something I had quietly wanted for 6 months, and was now getting, and that it felt, specifically, like being seen in a room after a long time of being present, but overlooked. Not that anyone at work overlooked me, just that her version of seeing was different. More complete, more particular. There was an evening in late March when we got dinner. Just dinner. Nothing declared or established. Just the natural extension of a late workday and neither of us having plans. At a small place on Huron Street, where the tables were close together and the lighting was low, and it felt, uncomplicatedly, like the right place to be. We talked for 3 hours. About her family. She was the oldest of 3 sisters. She'd grown up in Pilsen. Her mother had opinions about everything, and a voice that filled entire rooms, and Gabby had spent her childhood navigating the specific balance between her mother's certainty and her own. She said this with affection, and something more complicated behind the affection. The way you talk about the things that made you who you are when you're still figuring out whether you're glad for it. I said, "You sound like you love her and she exhausts you." She said, "Both things are entirely true." I said, "Does she know you? The actual you?" A pause. "Some of her," Gabby said. "Enough of her. The parts that don't require explanation." I understood what she wasn't saying. "Does that bother you?" I said. She considered this for a long time. "It used to," she said. "Now it just is what it is. She loves me in the way she's able to love me, and that's real even if it's partial. That's a very generous way to hold it. It's the only way I found that doesn't cost me more than it gives." I thought about that for weeks. And here is the thing I started to see, in the slow accumulation of March into April. Gabby was not as whole as I'd imagined. Not broken. She wasn't broken. She was strong in ways I was still learning to see. But she was also carrying things. She was carrying the weight of being the one in her family who'd moved away and made a different life, and hadn't explained all of it. She was carrying the history of relationships that hadn't survived the honesty she brought to them. She mentioned this once simply, not as a complaint. "I've been told I'm a lot. I think what people mean is I'm direct and they like it until it's about them." She was carrying the specific fatigue of someone who had known herself for a long time, but had not always found the world especially accommodating of what she knew. I realized she had always looked certain to me because she was certain about herself. But she was not certain she would be received. She was not certain this, whatever this was, whatever was forming between us, would be met with the same honesty she brought to everything else. She had been patient for months. She had named the avoidance without making me wrong for it. She had come to my desk and told me she was scared too, and I had been so focused on my own map of who I was that I hadn't fully heard what she was telling me. She wasn't teaching me. She was figuring it out too. She was just further along, and she'd been waiting to see if I would catch up. The moment I finally understood this was a Tuesday. The Tuesday I told you about at the beginning. She'd had a difficult day. I knew it was difficult before she said anything, because she sent me a message at 4:30 that just said, "Tough afternoon." No punctuation. 3 words, period included, which meant it was more than a tough afternoon. She had a friend I'd heard her mention, Daniela, someone she'd been close to for years, who had said something dismissive and small about her work that had landed harder than it should have, because it had come from the place where you expect to be known and weren't. We'd ended up at the park near my apartment. Not planned. She'd been nearby, and I'd said, "Come," and she had. We were sitting on the long bench by the pond, and it was that brutal April weather, where the wind hasn't decided yet, and everything is either cold or not cold depending on which direction you're looking. And she was telling me about the conversation with Daniela, with the kind of controlled voice people use when they're being careful not to cry. She was being careful not to cry. I noticed this. I sat with it for a moment, and then I said, "You don't have to do that." "Do what?" she said, voice steady. "That thing," I said. "The controlled thing. You do it a lot. I've been watching you do it." She was quiet. "You're always the one," I said. "In every room. The one who names what's happening, who comes to the desk, who says the hard thing clearly so we don't all have to dance around it. You carry that. I've been watching you carry it since October, and I think—" I stopped, restarted. "I think I've been letting you." She turned to look at me. "I've been treating you like you're the capable one," I said. "Like you have it handled. And I think I did that partly because it was true, and partly because it was convenient. Because if you had it handled, I didn't have to worry about you. I just had to worry about catching up." Her eyes were doing something specific. The controlled thing was starting to fail. "You're not just the clear-eyed one," I said. "You have days where Daniela says something and it lands wrong and you go to a park and try to hold your face together. And I haven't been the person who shows up for that. I've been the person you showed up for." "Mia." "I'm not done," I said. And I meant it. I've been so busy trying to figure out what I was feeling and whether I was allowed to feel it, and what it meant about who I am. I made this whole thing about me catching up to something. And what I missed was that you were scared too. And you came to my desk and you told me you were scared too. And I heard it, but I didn't actually take it in. She was looking at me steadily. Her eyes were bright. "I want to be the person who shows up," I said. "Not just the one being shown up for. I want to know that you had a hard day before you have to text me 3 words. I want to notice before I'm told." Her breath came out slowly. "You're doing that thing," she said quietly. "What thing?" "Where you hold more than you need to." Her voice was softer now, the careful control releasing. "Where you carry the whole box yourself." "I thought that was efficient," I said. "It's not," she said. And something in that broke. Not painfully, but precisely, like a seal coming open. "It's lonely." I looked at her. She was not holding her face together anymore. There were tears. Not dramatic ones. Not the kind that changed the shape of a conversation. Just 2. One from each eye. And she didn't wipe them away immediately. And that was, I thought, more trust than anything she'd ever said to me directly. She trusted me to see her cry. She wasn't performing for me. She wasn't managing me. She was just sitting there on a bench in the April wind with her face open. And she was trusting me not to make it something she'd regret. I reached over and took her hand. Not as a declaration. Not as the beginning of something defined and labeled. Just, her hand was there, and I wanted it. And the moment called for something more than words. And so I took her hand. She looked down at our hands. She looked back up at me. She said, "I thought you said you didn't know how to not know something." "I'm still figuring that out," I said. "But you did this anyway." "Yeah." She turned her hand in mine, held it back. "That," she said very quietly, "is what I've been waiting to see." And I understood then, finally, completely, with the particular clarity that only comes when you stop trying to understand something and simply let it be true, that she hadn't been carrying everything confidently. She had been carrying it while waiting to see if I would stop organizing my feelings long enough to just feel them. She wasn't the capable one, and I wasn't the one catching up. We were 2 people, both a little scared, both a little sure, figuring out in real time what trust looks like when it's not theoretical. She wasn't the one who had it together. She was the one who'd been patient enough to wait for me to arrive. And I was not the one who had needed to catch up. I was the one who had needed to stop running a system, on something that wasn't a project. We sat there until it got cold enough to matter, and then we walked to the coffee place on the corner and ordered things we didn't particularly need, and we sat at the small table by the window and talked for 2 more hours about nothing specific and everything real. And at no point did either of us define what had just happened or where it was going. We didn't need to. Not yet. Not that night. That night was enough. I used to think that knowing yourself was a thing you finished, a project with a timeline. You got the information, you filed it, you operated accordingly. Gabby showed me it's not like that. It's more like you get a folder that keeps adding pages, and the good ones, the real ones, the people worth holding on to. They don't just see what's in the folder. They see how you carry it. She saw how I carried mine. And I finally stopped carrying more than I needed to. If this story found you today, if something in it felt true in a way that surprised you, write "found" in the comments, so I know you made it here with me. And if you want more stories like this one, stories about the real shape of love, the slow kind, the kind that asks something of you, click the video on your screen right now. I'll see you in the next one. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description.